Welcome to another Bytes with Beck and Benji. Thanks for joining us. Today's discussion is with Liam O'Shaughnessy, who is the Executive Director of Security Testing and Assurance from CyberCX, Australia and New Zealand's preeminent cybersecurity company. This conversation was centered around the breaking of security, including what is pen testing, how knowledge transfer is a core element in the hackerspace, as well as the human factor in security, not to mention much more. Over to you, Beck, Benji, and Liam.
Welcome everyone to Bytes with Beck and Benji. I'm Beck and I'm joined today by my co-host Benji. Hello Benji.
Hello.
And our special guest today is Liam O'Shaughnessy. He is the Executive Director of Security Testing and Assurance Team at CyberCX. Thanks for dropping by, Liam.
Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Tell us a bit about your work. What is a day in the life of Liam?
Look, unfortunately, at my level now, a day in the life involves way too much management and not as much hacking as I would prefer. Because my background is as a pen tester. I've spent a long part of my career hacking into all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But unfortunately, that's something that now gets left to the team. And most of my job involves looking after everything that goes around that.
The curse of management.
Yeah.
So you're more of a purveyor or breaker of things.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But I do very much enjoy, seeing the results that the team's able to achieve. And to be honest, there are some younger and amazingly technical people on the team doing things. And when I read their reports, I think, would I have ever been able to do that? I'm not sure. So, maybe it is time for me to be put out to pasture of management.
Mate,
It's exciting though, like seeing all the new stuff coming up. I mean, especially with, cloud computing, generative AI, is the approach to pen testing sort of changed with that evolution?
Yeah, look, I think the fundamentals remain the same. The idea is about, identify vulnerabilities. Have friendly people identify vulnerabilities before they're identified by adversaries. So that fundamental hasn't changed at all. But, where those vulnerabilities lie definitely evolved over time. It used to be, absolutely trivial to, if I can plug into any internal network, like I am going to be the main admin within a couple of hours. We still achieve that on certain, lower maturity organizations, but there's definitely the bar continually gets raised from a defensive point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But the bar also gets raised from, an offensive capability point of view. So that's always changing.
I think the thing that's most appealing to me in finding out more and more about this kind of topic is that kind of adversarial cat and mouse nature of everything. Is how much is a vulnerability made aware to the ethical side of the profession versus the nefarious side, and then kind of plugging all those gaps, and then, we found another workaround. And I think that's just so fascinating. And I wonder if it's just simply a matter of your limited time that you don't have to read all these things, which is why you're so amazed by what people uncover. But that kind of leads me into my question around, with managing different teams and obviously different skill sets within that, how does one in your position best deploy the appropriate personnel for different organizations? Like, is that part of the consideration matrix, or are they all basically pen testers? Here you go.
No, absolutely. Like the sort of work that we do is so broad that it's just not realistic to expect that, any one person is going to be across absolutely everything we do. Like the way that we, try to apply some level of like order to the chaos is we have a service catalog.
Mm-hmm.
So, we sort of break what we do up into specific services. We have over 40 services in that catalog, and that's something that, grows month to month, as there's more demand coming out. So, we have a team of 150 plus hackers across Australia, New Zealand,
Amazing.
a couple in the UK, a couple in the US.
Yeah.
We have a giant skills matrix of, these people have these sort of level of skills. And, as we're scoping work for customers, we'll be taking notes about, the skills that will be required on that job.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a specialist team who work on connecting the right person to the right job to make sure that we've got the people with the right skills matched to the right jobs every time.
it's like building a giant jigsaw puzzle. Hey, you've got a bunch of pieces, you've got a cover that you don't actually know what you're building, and then you have to kind of, with more information, start putting that together.
Yeah. I mean, like our delivery coordinator team, like, they play like sort of the world's biggest game of Tetris, with schedules. And, just when they think they've got it right, they'll be, this job won't be ready to start for 3 days. Can you just move this?
Just let them recoordinate 17.
Yeah, exactly. All the follow on, that has, but we manage it.
Are you finding much of a skills gap these days with all of the new technology, or are you guys doing a lot of continuous support training?
I mean, we do constant training and skilling up. I'd say there's always sort of a necessary gap in between, the absolute bleeding edge. But, like the skill set that we have for our people is, like a fundamental part of being a pen tester or a hacker is being adaptable. And, if there is something on the bleeding edge, someone with the fundamentals, someone who has knowledge in similar areas can usually have a look at a new technology and say, oh yeah, this isn't actually that new. This is actually very similar to
Predicated on this basic
That's right. There's really, there's nothing new under the sun in the world of tech. There's new tech stacks, new words around it. But for the most part, vulnerability types and classifications don't change. So people can very rapidly get up to speed. But it is interesting, like we'll be given a sort of, unique new job, something that we haven't, delved into before. And then the person on that, they'll spend a week on that job. And all of a sudden, they're a subject matter expert in that one area.
Yeah.
Like it's
down every rabbit hole in Warren, and suddenly they read everything on Reddit and everything on Substack, and all the Discord messages that come. Yeah, I mean, to me, that reconnaissance is what's so interesting. Is like you just sponge up as much info, not knowing what might be relevant to the actual solution of the case, and then bam, it gets solved because of that one thing I read or whatever have you.
Yeah. I mean, it's exciting for the people doing the work, because it means that you can go from zero knowledge in an area to I'm one of the top 0.1% of penetration testers in this technology in the world, because I've spent a week looking at it and literally no one else has.
I guess that could work in industry-based kind of stuff too, because if you're deployed to, say, a hospital or something with a lot of OT, you will very quickly sort of understand the procedures and protocols for that industry, and you just start knowing inside out.
Yep, absolutely.
And how much is that kind of knowledge transference, whether it be, I guess, relegated to the organization, Australia as a whole, or even just globally? I know you mentioned that, there have been some organizations looking at some of the GitHub materials that the team had put out, and how much of that is, I guess, inherently built into the profession of upskilling and just knowing what's coming up?
Yeah, I mean, like, security is a team game. Yeah, like, nobody knows everything. Even within an organization with a really large number in our team, we, there's a whole culture of sharing, around that, that hacker community. So,
within they will come type of mentality.
Yeah. And also just like that sort of, open approach to sharing, because, when the people who are part of the hacker community are generally 95% of them. I'm sure there's some that go to conferences who are, probably doing something on the slide, but most of them are working, for, we do offensive security, but to make defense better. Yeah. Right. So it's in everyone's interest for us to be able to share as much information as we can, because, it's in our interest for, even though other pen testers might be our competitors, we want to share techniques, we want to share learnings with them, and vice versa. We learn from them, and we all get better as a result.
It's a pretty passionate community, really. A lot of the conferences I've been to, everyone's sort of like let me share this new tool.
But wait. Yes, also this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, you get off on a tangent really quickly, but that's the exciting part of it. You just learn so much in such a short amount of time.
Yeah. Phil, part of the reason we ended up with a podcast and speaking to people like you is Beck and I just always saw, oh, what about this? And did you know this? And read this thing that's about this. And so I think, this gives us a perfect opportunity to be like, tell us what you know, because we've read a lot about this stuff, but actually like getting a hands-on experience with, we've kind of jumped in the deep end. For those that don't know, and I'm sure most of you listening do, what is a pen test? Like, end to end, what happens in a pen test?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally a pen test is a point in time engagement, right? So this is not, something that happens continuously. It has a beginning and an end, so it's a project. And the goal of that is to identify vulnerabilities. So that might mean the target of assessment is, it might be a web application, it might be, an organization's complete external perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
It might be an organization's internal network. It includes other things like, physical assessments. Can I get into your office? Can I get into your data center?
Someone in wearing a jacket, and then
all sorts of ways. There could be, social engineering. But the point is, we're here to identify vulnerabilities, and that's about 80% of what our team does. There are some other areas that we also provide, similar services, but are a little bit different to pen tests, where an increasingly common demand is, and this is just a reflection of where cybersecurity is that traditional pen testing is around identify the vulnerabilities with the idea that, well, if I've identified and fixed all the vulnerabilities, then you're not going to have any problems. And we know that now that's
risk-free.
Yeah, and we know that that's just not the case anymore. You will never find everything. New vulnerabilities are being identified all the time. And so there's that question of something bad happens to our organization. Can we detect it? Can we respond to it? What are our capabilities in that regard? Where are the gaps? And some people who are new to, using pen test services often think, we'll do a pen test and that'll be a great way to test our, defenses. And it's like, no, because a pen test does not look like an attacker for the most part, right? Like, we're going to be very noisy. Our job is during that limited time window to find as many things as possible. Real world attackers do not look like pen testers and vice versa. So there's some other services that we provide really aimed at testing and exercising that, detection and response capabilities, which may be, a red team where, we will act in the same way that adversaries will. So, adversary simulation is another word for red teaming. We will follow the same tactics, techniques, and procedures as adversary who might target your organization. We might model a ransomware gang is a really common one. And, does your security operations center notice that something's going on? And if they do notice it, how do they respond? Right. And red teaming is something that's been happening in industry for quite a while. I think the most recent trend is really around saying, okay, red teaming makes sense if you're mature, right? Like if you're already up to a certain level, but how do you get to that level?
Totally. And there's so much information. There's so many different people telling you different things. Yeah. The configuration specific to my environment. While I can read best practice, what about what's happening directly in my network?
But also upgrades, stuff and change components, things like that. They can all throw a bit of a spanner into the works.
Yeah, and it's quite common for organizations. Your security operations center, they may be external. That may be a third party who's doing that for you. So we've written some contracts for them, and we know what we think they're doing, but do they have complete coverage? And they might not know the answer to that themselves, because they're relying on ingesting, your logs, but are there gaps in your logs? It can be really hard to identify blind spots. That's why a really common newer trend is around purple teaming, because that's a sort of situation where an offensive security specialist sits down with the blue team. So purple is, red plus blue. They'll work together and the red team will say, okay, I am now doing this thing. Number one, was I able to do it, or was it blocked by some sort of software? If it wasn't blocked, was it logged? If it was logged, did it raise an alert? That's right. And then repeat that over through, hundreds of scenarios. And then based on that, you'll get this really good understanding of, do we have gaps? Right? Like where, and you will, right? Like everyone who has this opportunity has gaps, but it's like, how can we close all those gaps? And then once you sort of get there, it's like, okay, now we might be ready for a red team. We think we've closed all the gaps.
So what do you need to get started? Obviously, when you start doing a penetration test that everyone's aware of, you'll have an attack surface that is given to you and defined.
Yep.
What about in some of those companies that don't know what they've got. Like the topography of their network is a complete mystery. There's been people coming and going. There's forgotten devices, forgotten servers, things like that.
They're at maturity level 0, basically. Like, they haven't really started getting their ducks in order quite.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not uncommon for organizations to be in that. Like asset management is, sort of an underpinning that needs to be done before you can't do vulnerability management unless you've done asset management.
Who's using what and how, and then we can identify if they're using it that way, are they doing it the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be, from either an internal perspective or an external perspective. If you're not doing external asset management, that's a massive problem, right? Because if you've got random skunkworks teams spinning up servers on the internet that, may not follow all your security best practices.
Your own devices.
Yep. All sorts of scenarios like that. That's something that we work through with organizations. We aim to, we're not just doing a point in time assessment, but we're trying to help them level up. So, if that's something that we identify and say, the recommendation is not patch these devices. The recommendation is, how the hell did these devices make it to your perimeter in the first place? Like, what are your process
management process in place?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why, the solution to technical problems is not always technical solutions. Sometimes it could be a governance problem, and really identifying that and helping them level up. So the next time, there shouldn't be any of those issues.
Absolutely. And I think, working at Friendly Phishing, we're very much all about addressing the human behavioral problem, and governance is a huge part of that, right? If people don't know what's expected of them, or the organization hasn't laid out those kind of guidelines to follow, then people will just do what they naturally think is best and appropriate to the situation. For them, that isn't always best practice. It's really interesting that you speak to the kind of when you're ready for a pen test. Do most organizations go through some level of staged approach, obviously depending on the maturity, where you generally would bring in a blue team to assess the landscape, assess the skill set within the organization, then a red team or a purple team, and then a red team at the end as a final? We've secured the fort. We now have upskilled the guardsmen, if you will, and now we're going to try to break in. Is that generally the approach that's taken, or can it change drastically?
It can vary a bit. So red teams generally only make sense if you're a mature organization.
Right.
So that's an easy one. With the exception of sometimes we'll have red teams to help organizations that have some internal dysfunction. So the CIO is saying, our technology is extremely risky, there's big problems. And the CFO says, no, you just want more money.
Yeah.
We're really trying to look after, our OpEx spends and cutting costs. And so I don't think so. So, sometimes we'll come in and they'll be like, hey, can you just mess this up? I want a report that's like bleeding red.
Yeah.
So I can really sell that story to the board and say, we're in a bad place from cyber. Hopefully, with more, mature and, better functioning organizations where that's not the case, you would be at a high maturity level. But it can take a really long time to get all those, governance structures, strategies in place. And you can have the best governance documents and strategies in the world. And then, someone pops your unpatched server and they're in your network and, your entire organization's been crypto locked. They don't really care too much about, what the policy document said. So sometimes you do need to start getting on that technical foot early, even if it's just to, flush out the low-hanging fruit. And also those sort of tests just can help feel out, like, where is our security baseline? Because, particularly when you have, like,
where to go.
Organizations got a new CISO, they're like, I don't actually know how good we are. Like, my staff tell me we're good, but where are we? Where are we sitting? And, those sort of technical assessments are the ones that will give you hard answers to that question.
And that's a great point, because with the behavioral insights and some of the, I guess, mitigation strategy we put in for, identification of phishing, teaching people what to look out for in various contexts of phishing, there is never really a technical, this is the answer, like math, if you will. This is the answer you're looking for, and that's how you'll get the answer every time. Whereas it seems like with this technical stuff, beyond the nebulous governance, adherence and all that, that's what's vulnerable. Here it is. There's no qualms or questions about it. We got it. So there's kind of a lot less room for debate, I suppose, with those things, which it strikes me as a quote I heard from a DEF CON speech, which was, if you want to get your organization excited about it, the disaster recovery plan, burn down the business next door. And it's only through seeing the impacts that people actually come to realize, oh, that is really important. If we don't get that locked down, that could be us.
But we still have that optimism bias as well, where even though the building next door is burnt down, it's like, well, I think we'll be okay. You know, we're smarter.
Yeah. What's the chances of lightning striking twice in the same neighborhood?
And that's another bias. It's like, well, what are the odds? I mean, if it happened to them, we're probably okay because they're going to move on to, you know, bigger and better and more complex things, but just not always the case.
In a way, do you feel like some of the larger hacks that occurred over the last couple of years with Medibank and Optus and them being global things, do you think that kind of kicked into gear a bit more of a focus on maybe we're not where we think we are based on what everyone's telling us? Let's get some of those concrete technical guidances.
It's definitely kicked on the conversation, right? Like, you know, cybersecurity is now something that is discussed at the board level, and it never used to be, right? Like, you know, cybersecurity was for the security nerds who are, you know, some subsection of maybe in the IT team, maybe in the risk team, but, you know, it was just another job. Whereas, you know, now boards are asking questions, you know, where is our cyber maturity level? You know, where are we? So there is a lot more focus on it. I think quite rightly, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's doing a whole lot more pen testing, right? Because, you know, like, pen testing is one piece of the bigger cyber puzzle. You know, like, as a pen test consultant, you know, like, I'd love to tell you that, you know, the answer to all your problems is more pen testing, but usually it's not, right? Like, it's, you know, we can help you identify those problems. We can help you identify risks. That's our job. But, you know, how do we manage those risks? What are our processes for making sure that we're not introducing new risks as an organization? You know, they can fall into strategy, they can fall into governance. And, you know, like, no pen test in the world can help you in how do I respond to an incident, right? You know, sometimes we need, you know, incident responders. Sometimes we need crisis comms. You know, sometimes we need our teams trained to deal with these sort of things. And a mature cybersecurity process, you know, is one where we push security left. So, you know, like in the AppSec world, in the development space, you know, we always talk about pushing security left. So getting security embedded in the design phase, in the requirements phase of projects, not let's build our entire project and then do some security testing at the very end. Because number one, you end up with a less secure result. Number two, it's more expensive.
Way more expensive.
Like
and cost resourcing as well.
Yeah. The only thing more expensive than work is rework. And no one wants to do that.
Someone else picking up what someone else built, trying to figure out how they built it and fix it accordingly as well. It ends up being so much more costly and time consuming than just doing it properly from the start. And I think there's a big shift around, you know, OWASP Top 10, incorporating that within development teams. Friendly Phishing are actually working with an organization right now on their OWASP training, things like that. So I think there's definitely a bit more of a focus on the AppSec world. I can't obviously speak to the desire for pen tests and such, but I do think, you know, that business continuity, incident response, it's almost like pen testing sits at the identification vulnerability stage, and then the whole section thereafter gets handed off like a different segment of cyber, you know, DFIR, you know, comms people, things of that nature, where it's a bit more management and then getting things back on track than what was the problem and what happened, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like, pen tests don't solve problems.
Right.
In some ways, yeah, that's right. You know, like, management, the sales team don't like it when I say, you know, we're here to create problems for you, not solve problems. But the fact is, we don't create problems in pen tests. Yeah, we identify problems that you already had, but you just didn't know about. Yeah, like, those problems were already there; they already existed.
It's a very important part, but yeah, I do think there is potentially a bit of a misconception around, like, the purpose of those vulnerability tests. It strikes me as, like, given the shortage of skills that is obviously present not only in cybersecurity as abroad, but specifically in Australia. You know, our Home Secretary says that we're going to have a predicted skills shortage of, you know, tens of thousands of staff. CyberCX obviously trying to address that with things like the CCX Academy, upskilling people internally and putting them into the appropriate practices. What level of, I guess, challenge do you find working with organizations that are interested in blue teaming, uplifting the maturity, then undergoing a pen test, having those requisite skill sets to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Because, like part of, our recommendations may be, around don't do this, manage this better. And their response is, I've been trying to hire someone to manage this unsuccessfully. And we quite often get requests from customers who say, can you just body shop someone in for 12 months? Like I'm desperate. And usually our response is no, right? Like our approach to professional services is, it's not a good fit, and it's not actually going to help your organization, because at the end of 12 months, you're probably still not going to be able to hire someone. So as a professional, and as a professional services organization, like I see our job is to help them mature. So, what can we do to help you? Is it train up staff? Is it, level up your existing workforce? Help you recruit, help you have, compensating controls to deal with things. So
what level of, I guess, technology stack that whether CCX uses in its SOC or whatever have you, don't obviously need to go into details of that, but do we recommend those as like the best practice guidance of like, this is your circumstance, we're not going to manage that for you, but here are the tools and how
an idea, things used.
Yeah. Look, as people here to point out, risks and problems with the penetration testing team, we're really careful in that our advice is completely vendor agnostic. Like we will never say, oh, hey, we found this problem, so what you really need is a vendor A. Oh, by the way, can I introduce you to someone who can sell you a vendor A? Because it completely undermines the message. So we'll never recommend anything like that.
Makes sense.
Sometimes customers wish we would, because it's that same you've given me a problem, like I actually want a solution. And we can say, okay, we can help you identify, good matches for your organization. Because the thing is, for any particular problem, there is not one vendor who is ever going to be perfect. Like there's a reason that there's multiple vendors. Which one is a good fit for your organization, from a technical point of view, from a budgetary point of view,
from a management
point of view, what will work in with your other existing processes. It's a bigger decision, and usually one that we as external people are not best placed to make for you. So like we'll help you make that decision, but we're not going to make those calls.
I guess that gives rise to another question. Some organizations that already have, a security team, they might have different priorities, assumptions, things like that. And then it becomes sort of a board problem. So if here's the issues that we've found, that kind of goes against what our priorities are and the way we do things. So there's a bit of a mismatch in the recommendations versus how we're going to tackle.
And also, like organizations that have, internal security teams, like some of them are large enough to even have their internal like penetration testing teams. And they're fantastic. They do a great job, but some things are just a matter of scale. Like you can have people who are really good and focused on, testing your infrastructure, but they're probably not going to be, adversary simulation specialists. Does that team have access to a cyber intel team that can tell you the tactics, techniques, procedures that are being actively used against your type of organization in Australia and New Zealand? The answer is no, because they just don't have that. So, we work with organizations of all sorts of maturity levels. If they're more mature, we'll be able to provide, more specialist services.
These advice kind of levels up /
so it's less about them not taking you seriously and your recommendations seriously. It's more of a capacity.
And fit for purpose, I suppose, if they deem it not appropriate for whatever that context is, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I guess, that's pen testing more broadly seems like a global thing to be applied to kind of any organization. But in Australia specifically, I know that there's a lot of different, considerations. We like to have many policies in place here in Australia. Are there anything like Australia specific that you need to consider when doing engagements of this sort that may also potentially inhibit that knowledge transference that we discussed earlier, because it's like not relevant to the US or the UK? Or is all of this stuff pretty much as is?
Look, a lot of things are transferable. There, in terms of that, being Intel informed, there is definitely a regional overlay on that. And that's something that we get working with our cyber intel team. There are certain threat actors who use Australia and New Zealand as a testing ground for their campaigns. They'll quite often, witness a campaign that's happening in Australia and New Zealand, and then only afterwards see that in the US and, in Europe. But the really big, cyber intel teams and pen testing teams, internationally, they have a massive US and European focus because, that's their center of gravity. Yeah. So I think that there is elements of that. That's really when we're talking about the high end of the maturity scale. For most, sort of bread and butter type pen testing work, it's no different.
Cross-site scripting, all the type of stuff that just generally broken access control, stuff that affects most applications. Or
absolutely. It just doesn't change that much from region to region. I'd say that organizations do have different, levels of maturity. I think Australia, in some ways, is a little bit behind, and we've been doing massively, rapid maturation in the last couple of years as cyber has become a talking point with certain programs, in particular industries as well, and a lot of that is just dictated by government acts. So things like the Security Critical Infrastructure Act is just pushing a whole lot of extra focus around critical infrastructure, which good, it should be. It's critical infrastructure for a reason. And some organizations as part of that industry had already done a whole lot of work and were sitting pretty, and others went, oh God, we're literally 10 years behind where we really need to be. And there's a bit of a scramble to catch up. There's similar sort of initiatives across, other industry segments, like the financial services industry in Australia has a regime from the Reserve Bank called CORI, which is a special type of red teaming that, does need to be cyber informed. There's only a certain number of providers who can provide those. And, so they started off with, big four banks. You guys are in the spotlight for that, and then it's slowly going to your tier 2 and tier 3 financial services industry organizations. So there's a whole bunch of orgs going, we don't have to do a CORI this year, but we're going to have to next year. Let's get ready. Which is good.
That's
again good. That's where the money is. We'd like the money to stay there.
Exactly. No one should touch that giant hoard of Scrooge McDuckian wealth under the vaults. But I mean, with respect to the ongoing nature of some of these things, I note that the Essential 8 has been something that's been around for a few years now, and the adoption of it, while you can probably speak to this better than I can from where I was sitting, doesn't seem to be across the country, if you will. Like certain areas and certain industries adopt that more holistically than others, and I do wonder what your insights would be around. Why do you think that is? Like certain industries are more open to adopting those clearly best practice guidelines that, do the bare minimum and then get you up to the next level. What's the reticence?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thinking about, the way the Essential 8 is framed, the people who've defined that have tried to come up with a simple, short list of controls that are suitable to the broadest possible range of organizations, right?
So read. It's easy to say,
And they've done a great job. And the Essential 8 is extremely valuable, and it can be a really good sort of initial benchmark. But that's what it's designed for. It's not, okay, we've done the Essential 8 to, EL level 1 or EL level 2. Our job is done. What it's trying to do is it's
comes in, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and things like, NIST maturity frameworks, and, you can use, E8 as part of your, something like, ISO certification. So, I mean, what we see is, E8 is being used by organizations that have a government exposure, right? So like government orgs, whether federal or state, obviously have mandated E8 exposure.
Does that feel consistent across government departments?
Well, as consistent as anything gets across government departments. Yeah. And it's sort of interesting because, my team works very much at the technical level. And there's sometimes some really interesting discussions to have with organizations because they say, we did an E8 review and we are at this level. And we say, all right, how did you establish that? And they said, we went through our policies and our policies said we're at this level. I'm like, okay, well, I've got some bad news for you because, I was just able to run an Office macro on your SOE. Oh, really? Oh. And so
back down to 1.
Yeah. So unless you're doing actual, like proper technical testing, you'll never know like what Essential 8 level you're at. And some of the Essential 8 are more design goals, right?
It's more of a communication piece, right? To kind of align the understanding across the org of this is what we're aiming for. Like everyone that's involved in that aspect, this is the Ferrari goal.
It's part of the culture at the end of the day.
It's a culture.
If that culture doesn't permeate all staff, then it's all going to drop off.
Yeah. And other things need to be aligned with it. So a conversation that I was having the other day was around like multi-factor authentication. I was saying, we're using SaaS products and, with SaaS vendors that support our identity and access management solution, we have, single sign-on through that IDAM so we can enforce the MFA. But then some of our SaaS providers, they just don't support, logging in that way. So we've got, it's just single factor or they've got their own solution. I'm like, why are you onboarding a SaaS partner? Like as part of your, business to business, like onboarding, how is compatibility with our IDAM system not a hard requirement?
It's part of the procurement process where security is infiltrating every aspect of the organization, right? It's like, are you bringing anything in? Are you taking anything out? You need to assess it from a security aspect in every level of that deployment. And that shifting left, I feel like, is not just happening in AppSec, where it's obviously very, very important, but broadly procurement, governance, using AI in the workplace, which I'm sure you can speak to as well, but we probably don't have time for today as much as I'd love to. These things do kind of have both a top-down and bottom-up approach where what are people doing on the ground and what do you think people are doing on the ground, and then kind of meeting in the middle to actually ascertain where do we go to from here.
Yeah. We need to, the ideal is organizations where, all staff are aligned and have, not everyone is a cybersecurity specialist, but everyone thinks about security. I've been on site in an organization where they had on every mirror in the bathroom this little sticker that said, you are looking at the person responsible for OH&S in the workplace. And I love that. And it's really cool for OH&S, but the same applies to security.
Yeah.
Right. Like literally everyone in an organization needs to be responsible for security. If your policy is we don't let people tailgate people through the office door, everyone needs to be on board with that. It doesn't work if, only half the staff are doing it. And the same approach needs to apply to everything to do with security.
I think people, it's something we've discussed on our podcast before. People have a degree of don't want to come off as a jerk and don't want to be the person that is in the wrong in those instances. But
or hierarchy, it's like, I don't know, are you above me or below? Like, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell you this.
Yeah.
When this should be empowered to just say, hey, sorry, haven't met you before. Who are you? Where are you coming from? Where are you going?
Yeah. Nice to meet you. I'm Benji. What's your role? It doesn't even have to be, what are you doing here? Explain and show me your ID. But
I've been stopped here before. I'm delighted.
I love that I've also been stopped here as well. Yes.
But like your point about responsibility is a good one because it's about just making clear to people that you are responsible. Like the example from the military is always, if you have a private who's driving a vehicle and the general gets in, private can say, General, sir, put on your seatbelt, right?
Yeah.
I'm in control of this vehicle. I'm responsible for making sure everyone in this vehicle is wearing a seatbelt. I don't care if you're the general and I'm the private. That's my job.
It's about the responsibility of the role you've been given within the context of the operation, organization engagement. And I think that's a really, really important one is security is only as strong as each one of us. You, of all people, know that better than most. A simple phishing link can kind of crumble an organization, and that's kind of the end of it. I guess my final question, if I may pick your brain before you leave, is with respect to phishing, how important is that within pen testing? Is phishing still a primary method of, infiltration, privilege escalation, or is it becoming more around the social engineering, getting them out of email into WhatsApp or Slack or whatever have you?
Yeah, look, I was going through our CyberCX DFIR team's annual review that I know we've had access to. I'm not sure if it's public just yet.
Okay.
I'm sure it will be soon, if not.
Stay tuned.
And one of their observations was last year, phishing was still the number one initial access vector. In the most recent year, it's actually dropped to number 2. And the number one initial access vector was already compromised credentials, right? Yes. Which in a lot of ways for an attacker is even easier, right? Like I don't have to trick you into clicking a link if I can just find your credits somewhere else, whether that's credential reuse, whether that's, credential stealing malware that, is quite common on,
key logging,
deployed on devices, key logging, all sorts of different ways to get that. From a, risk model point of view, both of those are just initial access vectors, right? So there's a whole bunch of different steps in an attack chain to go from that to a complete compromise. And as defenders, we only need to stop one link in that attack chain. So yes, phishing is important. But, as is the credential management and, dark web monitoring, multi-factor authentication, would render, in a lot of scenarios, both of those initial access vectors moot. It would stop both of them. So, like everything in security, there is no silver bullet, because if there was, we'd be using it.
We wouldn't be in business.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It would be a solved problem. So, yeah, look, phishing is still used a lot, and it's something that, we work closely with a lot of organizations around phishing. But I think phishing is a really important discussion point around security.
It kind of starts the conversation around social engineering, leveraging that authority, making you kind of pretextually believe something's fabricated. It really is
a low barrier to getting into it. Someone doesn't have to be the big bad hacker to start off a phishing attack.
Yeah. I mean, it's someone who has been made aware of the risks and the why of phishing. It's not just about don't click the link. It's about understanding there are threats to your organization and there are people trying to do those things. So, that sort of awareness training can help people, if they're being socially engineered on the telephone. There may be zero link clicking involved, but, giving people that security awareness and thinking about it. And, there is that built-in skepticism, still friendliness, but that just healthy skepticism, is this real? Is this a scam?
With everybody's digital footprint being so huge right now, there's a lot of information out there about you that we can just go, okay, cool, I know all about you and I'm going to use it.
Yep. Our very first podcast was titled Bringing Back Stranger Danger, because we all grew up in an era where, physical people, don't trust that stranger. I think online it's becoming even more kind of required to mostly approach things with a level of skepticism until you're convinced otherwise, and not the other way around. I do think people have a propensity online to trust kind of services and service people a bit more than they do face to face, and that's where a lot of things can, you accidentally steal some PII or leak some data that you didn't intend to, and that's what'll catch you out in the later years that you end up getting caught out.
Yeah, well, that classic Cold War quote, trust but verify.
Trust but verify. That's made
some espionage stuff.
Absolutely. Do you think the initial access brokerage kind of has kicked off that reuse of credentials aspect, because people are kind of infiltrating into organizations, then selling the credentials, and then just regular ransomware gangs that don't necessarily know how to ransomware or build the ransomware, are just using those things to then infiltrate an organization? Is that partly why phishing has kind of dropped to number 2? Or
yeah, I mean, it's just such an ecosystem.
Such an industry of cybercrime, hey?
Absolutely. Like a lot of people who haven't been exposed to it don't realize just how specialist, the person who stole the creds will never use them. They'll package them up and they'll resell them. And just how cheap some of them are. Like our adversary simulation group was able to compromise, very, very large Australian organization for 50 cents.
It's insane,
right? Like that's how much the credentials cost. And that was initial access specter for a red team. And there was one of those things where we're like, this is now an awkward discussion.
Yes.
So we get the initial access, then we call them up and say, hey, we've got the initial access, but just wanted to let you know, we got it from some bad guys. Bad guys have your creds. So can we reset those credentials?
Reset everything.
But then also, can you leave us that initial access? Because, part of the exercise is us actually proving to you, what can happen after the initial access.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, very gently and, a risk-managed approach.
That's crazy, though. An entire organization brought to its knees for 50 cents. What a bargain.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, there's things online that even just looking up peripherally, this isn't my area of expertise in any way, but finding things like rocku.txt and just brute forcing through Hashcat or whatever, like things like that, where someone hasn't updated their password in the last 5 years, you're done. Like, you're done.
Yeah.
So there is a degree of being aware of what is available out there, I think is really, really important. Liam, this was amazing. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about all this.
Yeah, thanks for dropping by. And I have no doubt we'll probably ask you to come back again once we've thought of some more questions.
It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll be back in a fortnight with another episode of Bytes with Beck and